guys, happy Monday. I'm reading from Mrs. Sidebottom today. So today we're going to read chapter 6 and chapter 7. So chapter 6 is BB. So let's find out about BB. BB was a girl with short brown hair, a little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and a big brown eyes. Her full name was BB Gunn. She was the fastest drawer in Mrs. Jewell's class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, and a flower in less than 8 seconds. But of course, BB never drew just one dog, or one cat, or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 20 dogs, and several eggs or watermelons. It took her the same amount of time to draw a watermelon as an egg. Calvin sat next to BB. He didn't think he was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. So instead, he just helped BB. He was BB's assistant. As soon as BB could finish one masterpiece, Calvin could take it from her and set down a clean sheet of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Calvin was ready with a new crayon. That way, BB didn't have to waste any time, and in return, BB would draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Calvin. It was 12:30, time for art. BB was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Calvin was ready. He held a stack of paper and a box of crayons. "Ready, BB?" said Calvin. "Ready, Calvin," said BB. "Okay," said Mrs. Jewell. "Time for art." She had hardly finished her sentence when BB had already drawn a picture of a leaf. Calvin took it from her and put another piece of paper down. "Red," called BB. Calvin handed BB a red crayon. "Blue," called BB. He gave her a blue crayon. They were quite a pair. Their teamwork was remarkable. BB drew pictures as fast as Calvin could pick up the old paper and set down the new one. A fish, an apple, 3 cherries. Bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Mrs. Jewell announced, "Okay, class, art is over." BB dropped her crayon, fell over on her desk. Calvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broken their old record. BB had drawn 378 pictures. They lay in a pile on Calvin's desk. Mrs. Jewell walked by. "Calvin, did you draw all these pictures?" Calvin laughed. "No, I can't draw. BB drew them all." "Well, then what did you draw?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "I didn't draw anything," said Calvin. "Why not? Don't you like art?" said Mrs. Jewell. "I love art," said Calvin. "That's why I didn't draw anything." Mrs. Jewell did not understand. "It would have taken me the whole period just to draw one picture," said Calvin. "And BB would only have been able to draw 100 pictures. But with the two of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art." BB and Calvin shook hands. "No," said Mrs. Jewell. "This isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you have, but how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing one picture of a cat. In that time, I'm sure BB could draw 1,000,000 cats." 2,000,000, said BB. Mrs. Jewell continued, "But if that one picture is better than each of BB's 2,000,000, then that person has produced more art than BB." BB looked as she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Calvin's desk, threw them in the garbage. Then she ran from the room. "I thought her pictures were good," said Calvin. He reached into the garbage pail and took out a crumpled picture of an airplane. BB walked outside into the playground. Louis, the yard teacher, spotted her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm going home to draw a picture of a cat," said BB. "Will you bring it to school and show it to me tomorrow?" Louis asked. "Tomorrow," laughed BB. "By tomorrow, I doubt I'll even be finished with one whisker." Chapter 7 is Calvin. Calvin had a big round face. "Calvin," said Mrs. Jewell, "I want you to take this note to Miss Jarves for me." "Miss Jarves?" asked Calvin. "Yes, Miss Jarves," said Mrs. Jewell. "You know where she is, don't you?" "Yes," said Calvin. "She's on the 19th story." "That's right, Calvin," said Mrs. Jewell. "Take it to her." Calvin didn't move. "Well, what are you waiting for?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "She's on the 19th story," said Calvin. "Yes, we have already established that fact," said Mrs. Jewell. "The 19th story," Calvin repeated. "Yes, Calvin." The 19th story, said Mrs. Jules. Now take it to her before I lose my patience. But Mrs. Jules, said Calvin. Now, Calvin, said Mrs. Jules, unless you would rather go home on the kindergarten bus. Yes, ma'am, said Calvin. Slowly he walked out the door. Ha, 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 laughed Terence. Take it to the 19th story. Give it to Mrs. Jarvis, hooted Myron. Have fun on the 19th story, called Jason. Calvin stood outside the door to the classroom. He didn't know where to go. As you know, when the builder built Wayside School, he accidentally built it sideways. But he also forgot to build the 19th story. He built the 18th and the 20th, but no 19th. He said he was very sorry. There was also no Miss Jarvis. Miss Jarvis taught the class on the 19th story. Since there was no 19th story, there was no Miss Jarvis. And besides that, as if Calvin didn't have enough problems, there was no note. Mrs. Jules had never given Calvin the note. Boy, this is just great, thought Calvin. Just great. I'm supposed to take a note that I don't have a teacher who doesn't a teacher who doesn't exist and who teaches on a story that was never built. He didn't know what to do. He walked down to the 18th story, then back up to the 20th story, then back down to the 18th, back up to the 20th. There was no 19th story. There was never a 19th story. And there will never be a 19th story. Calvin walked down to the administration office. He decided to put the note in Miss Jarvis' mailbox, but there wasn't one of those either. That didn't bother Calvin too much, however, since he didn't have a note. He looked out the window and saw Louis, the yard teacher, shooting baskets. Louis will know what to do, he thought. Calvin went outside. Hey, Louis, Calvin called. Hi, Calvin, said Louis. He tossed him the basketball. Calvin dribbled up and took a shot. He missed. Louis tipped it in. Do you want to play a game? Louis asked. I don't have time, said Calvin. I have to deliver a note to Miss Jarvis up on the 19th story. Then what are you doing all the way down here? Louis asked. There is no 19th story, said Calvin. Then where is Miss Jarvis? Asked Louis. There is no Miss Jarvis, said Calvin. What are you going to do with the note? Asked Louis. There is no note, said Calvin. I understand, said Louis. That's good, said Calvin, because I sure don't. It's very simple, said Louis. You are not supposed to take no notes to no teachers. You already haven't done it. Calvin still didn't understand. I'll just have to tell Miss Jules that I couldn't deliver the note, he said. That's good, said Louis. The truth is always best. Besides, I don't think I understand what I said either. Calvin walked back up the 38th flights of stairs to Miss Jules' class. Thank you very much, Calvin, said Miss Jules. Calvin said, but Miss Jules interrupted him. That was a very important note, and I'm glad I was able to count on you. Yes, but you see, said Calvin, you delivered the note to Miss Jarvis on the 19th story? Asked Jason. How did you do it? What do you mean, how did he do it? Asked Miss Jules. He gave Miss Jarvis the note. Some people, Jason, are responsible. But you see, Mrs. Jules, said Calvin. The note was very important, said Mrs. Jules. I told Miss Jarvis not to meet me for lunch. Don't worry, said Calvin. She won't. Good, said Mrs. Jules. I have a coffee can full of Tootsie Roll Pops on my desk. You may help yourself to one, for being such a good messenger. Thanks, said Calvin. But really, it was nothing. Very interesting. Okay, tomorrow we'll read chapter 8, and that is on Myrons. We'll learn about Myron tomorrow. You guys have a fantastic Monday, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.